This is the Nomad Futurist podcast, a podcast about the evolution of technology, society, and transformation. Connect with us, share your thoughts with us at nomadfuturist.com. Let's get this started. Here are Phil and Nabil.
Hello. Welcome to Nomad Futurist podcast. This is Nabil Memo with your host from Kona, Hawaii.
This is Philip Koblenz, your co-host from Brooklyn, New York.
I'm with Norris, coming from Silverthorne, Colorado.
Luke, thank you very much for taking the time and joining us. Let's start with your background.
Hopefully we got a lot of time. I graduated high school early, and networking was a passion of mine. So I was pretty young, and I actually got my CCNA, I believe, at 15. And that was the Cisco certification. And that opened up the door where, at the time, I believe it was US West was just rolling out a DSL. This was the advent of sort of broadband internet, where you're moving from dial-up to actual sort of always-on connected broadband. And I think a recruiter just found out I had that certification and reached out to me. I was in high school. And all of a sudden, I was making more money than both my parents combined as a junior in high school, working 6 hours a day after football practice in Portland, Oregon, helping roll out the broadband. It was little Cisco routers, if I remember right, Cisco 605s. And that created a pretty cool little gig for me. I'd say right around about 18, a company called Service Corporation, this is right in the middle of the dotcom boom, right before the dotcom bust, picked me up because HIPAA compliancy, the healthcare space, was becoming big. And all these hospitals and all these big healthcare systems needed to start getting HIPAA compliant. So I was going around reviewing their technology, and I was traveling so much that I had to have sort of special prepaid phone cards and prepaid cards with Avis so that I could even rent a car to be able to drive, because they wouldn't rent to you if you were under 25. And we had like a $25,000 prepaid service. That was making my employer at the time so annoyed that they actually flew me to Colorado and moved me out here. And I think I'm literally 18 at this point. The dot-com bust was starting to happen, but there was the Google of our time, Silicon Graphics, was still in the middle of their boom. And I call it the Google of their time because literally Google's campus is now Silicon Graphics campus. They actually bought the campus when Silicon Graphics went under. So all of a sudden at 19, I find myself with top secret clearance building out supercomputers for the government and for institutions, utilizing my networking background, and really was sort of the advent of containers and distributed computing. And that really sort of broadened my horizons to, I think, give me the ego that I could kind of do anything.
You have an ego?
Yes,
I don't believe it.
At the time, it was literally like there wasn't a technology challenge I couldn't tackle and wrap my arms around. Quickly, one of the companies that needed me to build and work on their supercomputing was Marsh McLennan. They're a big parent company. I believe they're one of the oldest companies in the world. They own Mercer and Putnam and all these financial companies, and they had analytics, trading, and these supercomputers. And I started working with them, and then I realized that there had to be a whole security arm to what I was doing around networking and what I was doing around supercomputing. So right around this time, so 17, 18, I went and got my certification for CSSP. It's sort of the predominant information security certification. And then a new certification came right out called AISSP, the architecture version of it. And I literally have, I think, number 10 when it comes to the numbered certificate on that.
If I may just bring this up, and I think we just captured this, that you were one of the youngest guys to get your certification, the CISSP, at the age of 15?
No, it was 17, and it was kind of interesting. They sent me the letter saying I'd received it, and then they sent me a letter saying that they were changing the rules, requiring, I believe, 5 years of work experience from there on, so that nobody else will get anywhere near my age. And it's a pretty cool little email I can try to bring up.
Sure, yeah.
If only we had a Guinness Book of World Records for our crazy business, then ladies and gentlemen, Luke Norris.
Yeah, I might have something there. I mean, this was really cool because now I'm effectively being flown around on a private airplane with the CEO and CTOs of Marsh McLennan and their parent companies, kind of being the main security guy for one of the world's largest companies. Really, as you know, security and infrastructure was getting sexy, and for me, just to be at that age and to see sort of that level of business acumen. One of the cool things that happened at that time is Marsh owned a company called Kroll. Kroll was in Colorado. Marsh is obviously a big New York institution. And they both utilize SunGuard availability for disaster recovery and for primary hosting. SunGuard goes and buys a company called Inflow in Colorado. And since I had known both the leadership teams, I was asked to apply to run their operations and integration, bringing those two large companies together. Keep in mind, I believe I'm 19 or 20 at this point, and I have 700 staff members now working.
And by my count, you're 19 or 20. This is job number 6.
I've had several of them. I was typically, I'd say 9 months to a year was the max I was staying in any one place. That's for sure. So this was just an amazing opportunity for me to take on not only leadership, but also this was the first time I was really running critical infrastructure at a global scale. I mean, SunGuard at this point had 5.5 million square feet of raised floor data centers in something like 14 countries, 24/7 around the clock operations, and then to integrate that with the startup that we had, Inflow. It was just an amazing sort of tech feat that we were able to pull off, and it was an amazing management feat. I remember one of my employees, I took to lunch, I think he was 50, and he was just laughing the whole time that his boss's boss is 20 years old and he's having to sit across the table type scenario. I think nothing sort of exemplified the dotcom boom better than that, but also nothing exemplified sort of the ability for somebody who had real good aptitude and really wanted to sort of put the pedal down to learn and to work. I was able to take advantage of everything during that time. So couldn't be more gratitude. Just to sort of quickly fast forward to what we're doing now. So I saw SunGuard had 2 imperative blockers, and there were 2 things in the industry that were going to transform SunGuard, and I didn't think SunGuard was nimble enough to take that transformation. The first was they leveraged public bonds to buy physical assets, and they applied those physical assets to disaster recovery contracts. And this was about 80% of their business. So they would literally buy an HP DL460 and put that on a paper contract. So a company with a disaster recovery could call up SunGuard and say, I want that exact server in this exact location at this particular time. So I saw that as a non-multi-tenant, non-sort of scalable business model, and the whole industry was moving this way. Keep in mind, at this time, the largest cloud company is actually Verizon Telecom, and they're literally running the biggest private and public cloud services out there. So I realized that they didn't have a multi-tenant model. Second, this little company, VMware, had just gone public. So it's like 2006, 2007. And we're looking at, this little company, VMware, was about to go public. It was 2005. And they were transforming the whole idea that you don't have to have branded hardware. You don't have to have named solutions, especially around the Intel chipset. And since SunGuard had that requirement to raise money based off of assets, I just didn't think their business model could pivot. I honestly went to the head of operations, the CEO effectively for SunGuard availability. SunGuard is a large company with multiple BUs. Told him that I was interested in starting up my own business, and he let me out of my non-compete. He actually became my first investor. He became my first board member and helped me get my company off the ground. So that was 2006. From 2006, I thought I was the smartest guy ever, and then the crash happened. 2009, the crash got even worse. I'm not rich, so bootstrapping the company was nearly impossible. I think I met Phil probably 2010, 11, may I add, as we were starting to expand past our data center. My initial business idea was, how do I take the Meet Me Room concept? And for people of the podcast, the Meet Me Room is, how do you take telcos and large businesses that want to interconnect together just by ordering cross connects and actually make that much larger than just the network stack, but the storage stack and the CPU stack? I actually took over, as I was bootstrapping my company, a small Meet Me Room company in Colorado called Confluent, Alf Gardner's company. Phil, if you remember Alf, he started to pay me.
How do you forget a name like Alf?
You don't forget a name like Alf, or Alf himself. He was just stalking me on LinkedIn, so shout out Alf. He was paying me to run the operations of his company underneath my own brand, and I was doing the network side in a virtual Meet Me Room, and then a virtual networking stack, a virtual server stack, and a virtual storage stack. And this helped me, bootstrap my own company, because now I could hire staff to help run Alf's company and my company. Alf liked it because he got a professional operator underneath him that could sort of do the day-to-day. He could focus on sales. And something really funky happened. I was actually in Frisco, Colorado, right around the corner. And I came up with a couple of concepts that I was seeing each one of my customers run into that was problematic. And effectively, they would have a configuration that they would want, and another customer would have a configuration that was unique that they would want, but there would be a part that's not unique that would overlap. And whether it was an IP address or a VLAN or a special need. And I sketched out a construct that if I could have another identifier above a VLAN, I could effectively allow all the customers to have their overlapping needs, bring your own IP, not have to change your configuration. I actually filed that patent in 2009. And today, just this week, we just got our 10th continuation patent filed off of that. So if you think about it, fast forwarding now about 4 years, I'm able to take storage and connect it to Amazon, Microsoft, and Google so that that storage is logically and physically running in all three of those clouds simultaneously. And this is one copy of storage. And we're just doing incredibly cool things. And our customers are literally changing the world based off of this technology. And, I call it a 10-year overnight success at this point because we have Dell and VMware and very large partners supporting us. But the technology and just the impact we're making on the business community and honestly the world at large right now, between COVID, between cancer research, between autonomous driving, I don't think our industry has ever been more sexy. I don't think our impact has ever been more real. Just literally my desire to get out of bed every day and sort of work towards this has just never been more passionate.
By my count, if you're keeping track at home, Luke is now 22 and a half years old. Let me back up for a second. So, you mentioned.
I apologize on the rant. I love talking about my business.
I mean, look, I don't think anybody will discount your passion. You are clearly passionate. There's a passion fanaticism. I don't know. It's one of those. One of those things. You're excited, which is usually my role in the podcast. If you go back, you mentioned that at an early age you were interested in networking coming out of high school. It doesn't sound like your parents had like a particularly technical background at all. So, how does that happen? Like, is it just because that's what was going on in the world at that time? Or did you find yourself at an early age just liking buttons?
Yeah, no, in high school, I think my dad managed a Lazy Boy a furniture factory, and my mom managed bagel stores. So I got free pizza bagels. I was pretty excited about that. Honestly, I think a lot of the networking passion actually, and this is one of the geekier things I probably have said, spun from my visceral need to lower my latency when it came to playing Doom and the follow-on games of Doom in the multiplayer scenario. I had figured out several things. First, I had figured out the impact of the local loop latency. And at the time, DSL and dial-ups were the worst. And I had moved to ISDN and other technologies to lower that local loop latency. Then I had actually started getting into early programming language. And I was actually teaching my computer to skip frames. So it was actually not sending a requirement to the BBS server or to the early internet server to actually have every single frame, because since I couldn't keep up with every frame, by not even asking it to do that, I was making my service more smooth, and I was lowering my latency. Therefore, my reaction time to shoot people, frag people, was higher. And I believe that's truly how it all sort of spawned out.
I will make sure that I don't force my son to stop playing Minecraft in the morning, knowing that, at some point, maybe that will dovetail into a career with, patents and multi-tenant, multi-cloud storage, blah, blah, blahs that Luke has since invented. So anytime you see anyone, Luke, on LinkedIn saying that he's flying around the world in Michael Dell's private jet, that while he has the biggest ego in the world, he's just a little boy still playing Doom in his basement. And that's the only reason why we're here today.
I kid you not. It was my kid's birthday over the weekend. I made sure we all had brand new computers to play Valorant, the new sort of first-person shooter together. And yes, it's a little family of video game shooters right here.
So what would you say over the course of your career would be one unique skill that has helped you to be successful?
I say this actually a lot. I do a weekly founders email to my company. I'm an entrepreneurs organization. I do a lot of speeches to budding entrepreneurs. I think there's one thing that's helped me more than anything, and it is it can be said two ways. I don't want to turn people off. So the first way you would say it is a stoic mindset. The second way you would say it is an open mindset. Michael Dell actually has a saying where he says it's a opportunistic or happy mindset. He doesn't want to look sort of towards the negative. And what I mean by that is I don't let the hard things in life overcome me. I try to break them down. It's sort of how to eat an elephant one bite at a time. You look at the big problems, you look at the major things that impact you, they all look like elephants. But if you break it down into sort of one bite at a time, you can do it. And then the more tangible sort of stoic mindset of it all, and I'm a very, very big believer in this, is I try not to interpret the way events and issues, whether positive or negative, are. And I try to just look at them to what they are at the tangible level. So what I mean by that is I didn't see the investment from Michael Dell. I didn't see that as me finally getting sort of my comeuppance or getting validation. I just saw it as a rich guy giving me some cash because it made sense for his organization. And if you keep breaking it down like that, it's tangible. You can look at how you can take actions on it. You can not be overwhelmed by it. I wake up and I have a list every day. In fact, I require my staff, they do a top 5 and top 1 of 5 for the week. So what's the top 1 thing you got to do? And what's the 5 things you got to do this week? And then every day they post in Slack how they're making progress on that particular stuff. And it's really just to instill that mindset, even into sort of the leadership of the organization, all the way down to the individual staff members do that at a particular level as well. And I think that one mindset, that open mindset, the fact that there's never a closed pie, the pie only gets bigger the more people you bring in, and the problems that are there, you can always tackle them if you break them down. It's by far the biggest thing that's impacted my career.
Well, that's just the mankind in our psychology as well, right? You've got to think positive. The glass is always half full, not half empty.
Yep. Absolutely.
Again, easy to say when you wake up in Hawaii every day.
Yeah, it is very easy to say. In Colorado, may I add.
Oh, God. This is the most symmetrical podcast we've ever had.
Also, probably from a hair perspective. Really good hair, somewhat nice hair, and then no hair.
I mean, you try to be a little bit self-effacing, but I'm not sure that you are the in-between between me and Nabil. I mean, there's plenty of hair on that head.
Oh, thank you.
What was your turning point to realize this? Because everybody, in particular in this day and age and the time that we're in, everybody's struggling with the idea that the glass is half full. So let's start with the turning point that you started realizing you're going to eat this elephant one bite at a time. There's a lot of opportunity. What was that turning point?
You know, I'd like to say it was something miraculous. It was honestly, I graduated high school early and I had one class to take. This is while I'm working for US West. And it was a philosophy class. And that instructor really introduced me to sort of Stoicism, Marcus Aurelius, and just everything involved there. And honestly, I've been a student ever since. And I think maybe he got me at a very, impressionable time. But I'll be honest, it was just an absolute turning point in that. And I know a lot of people sort of see it as a religion. I don't. I see it as sort of a philosophy. So that's why I have the two different sayings of the mindset. But ever since, it's really been sort of the driving force in everything I do.
Is there something, if you had to go back, if you had to look at, we all have, regrets and mistakes that we've made, or we wish we had done something differently. If you had to go back and look throughout your career about something that you would have done differently, what do you think that would have been?
Oh, man. Yeah, that's probably a whole nother podcast in its own right, to be honest. I do to some extent, and I won't let my kids do this. I skipped college, and I definitely want my kids to have that. And it's not about the learning. It's not about the, growing up to leave home. I did that, and I did that transition very well. It's the camaraderie, it's the people, it's the ecosystem that you get entrenched in college. And I think I definitely missed out on that, sort of taking the path that I took. Furthermore, I think I made my life harder on multiple levels. And everything we talked about on my career was only talking about the positives. Obviously, we could talk about the negatives. But I think my zest to constantly hop companies, my zest to take on that next challenge, in a lot of cases, always put me behind the eight ball, where I was having to do Herculean work to prove myself in that role, in that position, the reason I jumped. And I think in a lot of cases, there's much easier paths to sort of take on that on without just taking on the biggest challenge you can and chopping the elephant up into bites and seeing if you can eat an elephant as fast as possible.
You might just decide that you don't need to actually eat a whole elephant.
Yes, you might just actually decide that.
So one of the things that we have actually noticed in releasing these 20 podcasts over the last few months is that a lot of our guests have not had the opportunity to go to college. They ended up selecting a career path versus a college degree. Thereafter, and when you look around in the market in general as well, I mean, some of the biggest leaders in the space, they don't have college degrees and they chose this path. From a psychological perspective, or the behavior or the exposure, what do you think is the driving factor for a kid to go in that direction?
I mean, the opportunity wasn't exactly afforded to me from a finance standpoint. And like I said, I was, my first job, I was making more than both my parents combined. So it wasn't like they had the money or anything else. At one point, actually, I thought I was going to get a football scholarship. I actually tried out for the team. I remember the first play of the first day of pads, I got hit so hard by a guy about 150 pounds heavier than me that I realized there was no way in heck I was going to, A, make the team, or B, be an athlete that was going to stay on the team. So I got off quick, let me tell you. So I think that there is, though, a certain level of success that is required to have a chip on your shoulder. I know Phil has like 4. So you have to have something that drives you. You have to have something that pushes you to work beyond and above sort of that normality. And that typically is a chip. And that chip could be growing up without, all the silver spoons of a college education or the capability of having one. It could be, in my case, I'm severely dyslexic. If Phil can attest to this, if you text me, it's pretty much you need a dictionary that's called a Lucanism or something to convert it. So I had several of those sort of chips on my shoulders and sort of things I needed to prove, not just for myself, but for the external community. And I think that's a large driver of my success.
I think the first of all, let me back up. I can attest to the fact that Luke's texts are like completely illegible. But and my chips are all faking it till you make it. I mean, it's just not, I have my ego is completely manufactured, and I cry myself to sleep every night waiting until somebody exposes me for the complete fraud that I am. But I will say this, and I totally agree with your notion about, wanting your kids to go to have the college experience really more from a social construct standpoint and being able to achieve that level of independence and be on their own versus not. And if there's one thing that I think is true about those 70% of the people that have been on our podcast and the Bill Gateses of the world and the Mark Zuckerbergs of the world, is you guys all have something in common, which is, gosh, the social awkwardness is absurd. You guys are so weird. Where us college folks, I mean, we just had to learn how to just, negotiate our own weird personalities with other people and live with other people that were strange. I mean, who goes from, 16 years old being in the basement in Portland, Oregon to flying around on private jets? Of course you have chips on your shoulders. I'm surprised you even have shoulders. Anyway, that's my diatribe.
So based on that,
he's frozen again. Wait, perfect. Let me get a snapshot with that. I mean, I caught him at the right time. At least he was smiling. Jesus.
I literally got the end of your rant. I got Bill laughing, and then I felt like you guys cut me off. So that's awesome.
Well, it's just that would have been perfect for us to just end the show like a mic drop.
Yes.
You are awkward. I am better. Okay. We're recording again. I don't know. Take it. We left it off me ranting about how the social construct, the social elements of going to college are the real benefit, and the folks that we had on the podcast, the Lukes, along with the Mark Zuckerbergs and all those guys that you mentioned, have some element of social awkwardness to them that they have to somehow get over. later in life as they progress to their career. So I certainly agree with the idea of, college being, more of a social requirement than it is, for particular than it is for a particular curriculum. So that's where we ended up. I will take that one step further by suggesting that in the time that we're in today, with all of these colleges now going virtual or starting out in person and then moving to virtual, this kind of COVID-19 thing. I fear for the fact that social element of college, that social element of going away to college has been disrupted in a way that, might not be as seamless as it was when I went to college. I was the first graduating class of the millennium. I graduated in 2000. I wear it proudly. But how does that look going forward? How are our kids going to go to school? Is it one day just going to go back to the way it was? I mean, I assume to a certain extent it will. But do you think that's been impacted?
Oddly enough, so I had two of my nephews and one of my nieces go to college this semester. So it's the start. And I'd say one of them got to go to a small liberal school out east. The other two are going to CU here. And even though they're in a dorm setting, they have one class in person and the rest they take from their dorm. And they can't do any of the social functions. Boulder shuts down parties. Boulder doesn't allow congregations outside of greater than 10 people. To be honest, it's at this point, it's a near waste of money because, both of these kids, by the way, are brilliant. They don't need higher education to teach them sort of what they need to know to, be successful in life. And the social aspect is just completely missing. Will it come back? I got to imagine it's all going to come back to some level, some form. But I think we're also inherently changed for a very long time. The concept that, COVID vaccine is going to come out and we're all going to be just fine. I think this is the tip of the iceberg of just social and economic changes that we're going to have to make as a society over the next 10, 20 years.
And that, I think that's something we have to come to terms with. It's one thing to suggest that, you have the choice between going to college or not going to college, or maybe you don't. But there's this it seems like a permanently disrupted, at least, generation of college students that are. It's just, we're going to have to make sure that we are focusing on trying to enable them socially in the same way that, when you have really young kids like I do, you want to kind of encourage social interaction so they don't create their own little bubble like we've all been forced to create now. And I don't think there's a recognition yet of the kind of social, emotional, psychological tolls that this is going to take, not just on our youngest kids or the older generation that feels kind of trapped, but on the formative, young adults that are not going to have the same freedoms that we, took for granted not so long ago.
Yeah, I mean, just to put a bow on that, if I didn't have, YPO, Young Professionals Organization, and EO, I definitely think I would have overall missed out on that. I wouldn't have the support network to push through a lot of the problems socially and business-wise. A lot of those things I just gather you get from college. I got sort of in my postdoctorate type scenario after I had already got the facts of life, hit me upside the head and I started a company. Then I finally got that social interaction and support group.
Let the record show that Luke thinks he's got a doctorate.
I do have an honorary master's, but that's a different story.
Oh, for fuck's sake.
With COVID transforming our lives, how has it affected you with your work and your organization?
Yeah, I mean, that's definitely a, top of mind question. So, I mean, personally, I was telling you guys before, the wife and I rented our house in Denver and rented a place in the mountains. And, COVID, the pause that COVID has taken, the enablement of the remote workforce that it's rapidly accelerated has really enabled that. So, I'm able to wake up every morning, go for a 5 or 10 mile hike, and still get back to my desk and talk to Europe, which is typically what I do. I start my day, my European operations, and then move, west. that's just a transformative piece. We had a light work from home culture, but overnight we transitioned to a full work from home culture, and it's been hard. We look forward to the days when we can go back to an office 1 or 2 days a week. We have a very collaborative, open culture that requires debates and requires whiteboarding sessions, and we're always pushing the limit. And we miss those kind of things. In fact, there's literally a request here. One of my groups wants to do an offsite, and I was asking how could they be further offsite than they currently are. Does he mean he wants an in-person meeting?
Offsite requires that there's such a thing as an onsite.
Yes, exactly. So that's an interesting little debate we have. So from a culture, like I said, I think I've been able to take a pause back. I was literally doing day flights to Germany. I would fall asleep Sunday at 5 p.m., take a pill on an airplane, wake up, have a full day in Germany, get on a plane, land in France, sleep, get on another plane, land in Spain, and then typically either come home from Spain or Europe. And that was a typical every other week scenario for me. And flying out to see Phil, I've even done overnights to New York, had dinner with Phil, and then flew back the same night. So that hectic pace, that requirement.
In all fairness, that's because you've been banned from most of the hotels in New York.
That's true too. That's absolutely true. So I mean, just that absolutely hectic lifestyle. The idea that you can only close, large deals, $1 million deals by pressing flesh. This is absolutely just turned that on its ear. We've never done more business with large organizations faster than we are right now, and we're doing it completely remotely.
And do you think that's permanently disrupted? Are you ever going to get back on a plane in that same scale? Has the whole world kind of prioritized business travel or deprioritized business travel? And to a certain extent, it's become acceptable to do those things virtually. Why would you go back to the travel? It's so physically taxing and, not just physically taxing on the person, also physically and emotionally taxing on the family life, where you miss, all these things with your kids and your family. Nothing would make me happier than to escape my apartment right now, but I love my family. Is there any notion that we're going to go back to that at the same level that it was?
I think we have, especially in the executive and in the VC community, have realized the inefficiencies of that mentality in travel. So will I fly out every time there's a nice size opportunity to close a deal for a customer? Probably not. I will set up a Zoom with them. Will I fly out every time there's a problem with a customer? Probably not. I'll probably set up several Zooms with them. Will I fly out for a conference where I can meet 50 customers, where I can make 50 business transactions? I think those are going to be the new bars of sort of high value travel and high value needs of our times in a remote workforce. I think, one thing I love is the fact that I've had now 2 board meetings. I'm scheduling my 3rd board meeting now through COVID, and I haven't seen a board member except for Zoom. So there's no longer the board dinners. There's no longer the in-person, sweaty presentations where you're going back and forth. I think the whole paradigm.
Let's be clear. If you're sweating at home, they're still sweating.
Yes, good point. Good point. Once again, Colorado, I have nicer weather. So I do think that there's an overall paradigm change, and it's going to be very interesting how that sort of flushes out over the next. I think it's going to take 3 to 5 years to really understand what the new business paradigm is. I mean, honestly, I was talking to just before COVID, I went to handshake the head of sales over at Dell, and this is Billy Scannell. He's just by far the most consummate sales guy. The whole industry knows this man. He's literally built enterprise sales, and he did an elbow bump. And I asked him if he ever thinks he'll handshake again. And he said no. And that was just as COVID was hitting. And that was such a business thing. Like, we taught our kids how to, literally reach in and press the flesh and sort of look somebody in the eye and have a stiff arm. That's, I think, gone.
I think Nabil's a big fan of the shaka, right? Yeah, is that what it is? Yeah, that thing, obviously.
Oh, yeah.
Hawaii, right? Yeah, there you go, right? It doesn't make sense in Brooklyn. I get beat up for that. But I actually think my kid does it on Zoom. I think it means me too also.
Yep.
Me too. Okay. I think I have a 7-year-old and a 3-year-old. I think my 3-year-old will grow up, and when she's 15 years old, and I tell her that it was that we were doing handshakes when we met someone, she's like, "Are you guys suicidal? Are you nuts?
Yes, exactly.
You were touching somebody else's hand?"
Random people.
And
I mean, at a conference, I'd probably shake hundreds of people a day's hand, literally.
It's amazing that you still have the head of hair that you have.
So we've gone from one extreme to another, right? I mean, I used to fly about 250,000 miles a year to now, I think I've taken 4 flights this entire year. And those were the ones that I had to. I wouldn't have. But do you miss the social element? It's sort of challenging from traveling that much to being stuck in one place and not really having that physical interaction with people.
Oh, poor you, stuck in Kona.
I'm not complaining. I'm just asking a question. I mean, going from one extreme to another, are you finding challenges, or this is cool? This is the norm that we're perfectly content with.
So, as probably the only elder millennial on your podcast, I'm a little bit more introverted than the other generations, and I think the millennial generation, et cetera, is introverted, and there's a certain amount of calm and peace and control of your schedule and everything else. And I do find that. I miss, though, I literally viscerally miss business development. So not just sales, but synchronizing with our partners, setting goals with our partners, the dinners it takes, the commitment it takes, the relationship that you have to have set with these people to get through the hard times of business and relationship. And over this last 6 or so months of COVID, that has just been, I'd say, horrible. I feel like a lot of our business partnerships and relationships are all on an Excel sheet. There's no visceral or emotional need for us to succeed together, except what we can track on an Excel sheet. There's no promise in the handshake that we're going to get through the hard times, or we're going to persevere to get the first big customer, et cetera. And if I quantitate it, as I try to do, as I told you guys, that's just the thing I just miss the most. And then I miss the fact that when we get on the Zoom call, we're just going through the 5 or 6 goals that we put in place. It's not the catch-up that sort of makes us want to drive and exceed and excel together. That just first and foremost, because maybe it's such a large part of my job and it's a large part of why my career has been successful. I do miss that. I miss that incredibly.
How about productivity? I mean, it's like, the getaway pod or just a social interaction makes you think differently. Are you finding that to be a challenge, whereby we are on a Zoom call on an agenda, it's an hour-long call, and guess what? You've got 7 others planned right after each other. So we are zooming out. I mean, what's the boundary? What's the cutoff point whereby we're losing on that creativity for the future?
Yeah. So empirically, I could show that my managers and below are more efficient in getting more done than ever before. Empirically, I could show that the pipeline of effort, development, new products, new features is smaller than it's ever been before. And what that is showing me and the leadership team is our collaboration, our creativity, our focus on problem solving it's never been weaker. And that is an absolute detriment. And it could be the thing that kills the organization. But when we can quantify the work and we can pass it down to the people that need to actually do the work, they are more efficient. So we're looking at a different paradigm for the company in a post-COVID world where there will be 2 days in the office or 3 days in the office. And those will be hard collaboration days with back-to-back meetings, the in-person needs, getting the requirements nailed down, getting that documentation. And then there'll be days that, frankly, people are protected from meetings. They're protected from Zoom calls, and they just need to focus and get the things done. So by the time we're on the next week or the next cycle, they're contributing to new stuff and new innovation. And it's interesting. It's a dichotomy. We're losing our creativity, but we're closing out more task business than we've ever had before.
And I think it's an extension of kind of the social disruption, right? I mean, it's you talk about it in terms of, you being able to establish some sort of a real kind of emotional connection with your partners. And it's one of those environments where for the people that you have an existing relationship with, you can maintain those and to a certain extent even grow them because everyone is kind of zooming into each other's homes and there's less formality about our relationships than there has in the past. And I don't know if you know this about me, but I've never been a particularly formal person to begin with. So, the emperors all collectively have no clothes, and I'm never putting on clothes again. The metaphor has gotten away from me, but you get the point. I think establishing new relationships, just like establishing, creative applications and solutions are really difficult to achieve without having that kind of fundamentally in-person, type of a collaboration. And it's difficult. It's going to be something that I think a lot of companies out there, a lot of people out there have to kind of emphasize. We're still in this kind of indecisive, no light at the end of the tunnel kind of space where, we're in this kind of fight or flight survival mode. And, we're going to need to figure out how to create and how to kind of force the hand of some of the things that we had taken for granted, like, being in person. We always thought, we'll always be able to see our coworker and going in. It's not something that we necessarily predicted. Maybe we should have, would impact us. And having, we have to think about a whole different, set of solutions to problems that we couldn't have anticipated would get to us.
Yeah, I see it as sort of a next evolution of the speed of trust. You used to have this, do I like the person? Do I get along with the person? You set the first goal with the person, and then you see if you sort of mutually achieve that. That whole paradigm has to be turned on its ear, whether it's more formal or whether there's a more accepted society process for it. But, I'll be honest, I'm damn glad I'm not a, early startup right now. It would be very, very hard to pitch your wares, to get people to trust you, to get people to make that decision not for you.
What advice would you give someone that's starting and they're an early part in their career in our space?
If I was excited and starting down the infrastructure route right now, I would look at the speed of innovation and how that you can enable organizations to not just maximize the current speed of innovation, but actually accelerate that. What I mean is if you just take a step back with Amazon, Microsoft, Google, Baidu, and what they are bringing with new processors and new software, Moore's Law, which has been the defining thing in our space, has gone from doubling in speed and having inside in 18 months to, I think that cycle is now compressed within 3 months and maybe even getting less, because now you have the software effect driving the physical effect of chips and processors and hard drives. And that has created such a pace of innovation to just levels that literally stand the hair on the back of my neck when I think about how you apply that level of innovation to, say, the world's largest processor genomics, who I was just working with, are assisted driving, full autonomous driving vehicles. Those are all being driven from sort of concept to reality in 3 months, 6 months, 9 month intervals right now, because software and hardware are finally melding, and you have that ability to not just be an infrastructure person, but to be an innovation person, because you're combining software and infrastructure together. And it's never been a more just outright more lucrative time for people that grasp that concept, for the pace of innovation to give more opportunity. And I would start dead center in understanding how do you meld software and hardware together to speed up innovation. And literally the entrepreneurial are just the ability to even work for Google in that realm is probably the most exciting thing I can imagine these days.
So as an entrepreneur, with the speed to market, the pace of innovation, the idea that you can bring something to the market within 3 to 6 months, what are you seeing in the VC community with funding?
So the VC community and funding with, especially around COVID, hasn't skipped a beat. It's actually more active at higher valuations and faster processing than ever before. And what they are seeing is that the traditional companies are not innovating fast enough because of their own business process, their own requirements for quarterly goals. And a startup in almost any vertical doing almost anything can take the innovation of the cloud, the software development process, and the new hardware development process, and redefine a business as old as a train company overnight. In fact, you actually can. That's a very funny thing. Literally the traveling salesman problem, a computer wasn't even able to process that. And that's, what's the most efficient way to get to 6 points in a particular time zone? There were too many variables. Now you could actually run that algorithm in a supercomputer in the cloud and get a response. And now you could actually retrain how to, ship trains across the country. Literally you can almost look at any traditional business and completely upend it. And if anything, COVID is just making that exponentially more viable from a business capability, because now you can process online. The digitization of these companies is coming together with commoditization, and those are the main forces that are going to drive innovation.
So Phil and I talk about digital transformation quite a bit on this podcast. I mean, I've been a big advocate of digital transformation for the last decade, but it's been guided by the old guard that didn't want to make the change, working from home, working from anywhere, was not even a thought that they wanted to practice, whereby it's becoming more of a norm. And the idea of bringing other cultures or learning from other cultures, that the 40-hour week to be shortened to 30-hour week, or working 4 days a week versus 6 days a week sort of a thing. Do you see that becoming more of a norm as we move forward?
So I think the old companies that are not digitally transforming, let's take mortgage processors at traditional banks, they're being destroyed by Rocket, which can do a complete mortgage online in 10 minutes. Literally soup to nuts. Yes.
Tell Bill about that.
No, and I'm just saying it literally, the companies that are finding digital transformation where their increment sell does not have additional unit cost is absolutely destroying the previous companies. If you even look at the current stock market, the traditional banks are being absolutely outrun by Square and everybody else because their cost to add another customer or another unit or to do another thing of business has no incremental fees. I think when you adopt that mindset, you do adopt flexible work structures, because now you're not needing the process to make another unit. You're processing the next innovation. You're processing the next feature that will make a customer more sticky or add more value. And once you decouple the need for physical labor to make money, you can start looking at very unique, flexible work schedules, et cetera.
There's a lot of good stuff that's coming out of it. We are learning that there is a life and work balance, potentially.
For the first time in 30 years.
What are some of the challenges that you're seeing in your space, in your leadership role, that are not being addressed yet? For instance, are we becoming, with all these KPIs in place, are we enforcing a culture where every employee is just a number on a spreadsheet? Are we expecting them to work longer hours because they're rolling from their bed into their office space since they're working from home? What are some of those challenges that either you're seeing or you're forecasting or things?
My pause is I'm not seeing as much of a challenge in that in my organization, because we are, and in my field in general, because we are more idea-based, learning-based, and service-based. And I'd say there is a requirement in any infrastructure business to be available nearly 100% of the time for break fix. But as you are now the person, your site reliability engineers, your development engineers are the people building the product. They want to take ownership of the product when it breaks. And there actually is a sense of pride that if that is breaking too much, you didn't build it right, and they are refactoring and reformatting that. And that is in their control. And I think for the first time, this generation that's coming up is really in control of their destiny. The value of the product they build drives the consumer adoption of the product, and the way in which they build it and the resiliency of which they build it derives their own ability to have work-life balance and everything else. And that's pride, authorship, ownership. And that's almost like being your own entrepreneur within a company. And that's predominantly rolling out in my industry. I will say, though, I am struggling very hard, and I'm working with my executive leadership team, my partners, that there is a immediacy in both the metrics that I have to drive the company, but also the metrics that my individual contributors want to be measured at. And they want their bonus paid quarterly, or they want something that shows that their contribution is really affecting the company in a near instantaneous time. But the reality, as we all know, is innovation, adoption, that's a long arc. So the effort you're making now may not make a significant impact to the company 6, 9, 12 months down the road. And that's a real hard balance to say, what is the impact of this immediacy that's driving you to work extra hours to get the goal done? And what is that actual impact to the company long term? And how can those be balanced out? And that is something that we're absolutely struggling with in the middle of COVID more than anything, because we don't have, as you were saying, Phil, we're not sitting around a table late at night all collaborating to work to get that next thing done because we know it's a major impact to the company. Instead, the individual has a task in front of them, and they know if they hit that, they get their bonus. So they're going to work to that extent. And if all I do is lay on more tasks, they're going to work harder to get more tasks done to hit that next bonus type scenario. And that's a very cyclic problem that we're having to deal with.
And look, it sounds to me, and in the experience that I have, that communication and expectation setting and somewhat of a renewed focus on company culture is really important for companies that are gonna thrive in this sort of time. And you almost want to make sure that you don't that you kind of protect your workforce from burnout. Because in our world, particularly your world, that attracts these kind of hot in the moment type thinkers, sometimes when they don't have the external disciplines, the external reins that can be pulled on them, they'll just spin themselves out of control, because the only person in their office to talk to them are themselves, right? So you almost have to make this outward kind of or give mental health days, or just say, just calm down or check yourself or whatever, which is kind of anathema to the way we were told that we were supposed to lead. You're supposed to motivate people to work harder. In reality, what we need to do is motivate people for longevity and motivate people to be able to, not go completely postal on themselves and their families, and have a recognition that, when you're not working, you need to have the discipline to be able to be present for your family, as opposed to just thinking that because all of those things happen in the same dwelling, you're no longer driving to the office and driving back, that there is, sometimes people don't know really how to separate themselves, and until it's too late, can't make that recognition. So it's leadership's role to kind of communicate those things and almost have mental health type of checks on their employees, which sounds weird.
Yeah, and I think right now we need a lot of it. With the
certainly I do.
With the high unemployment rate, not knowing what the future is going to hold, not really having a good sense of direction from the government bodies, seeing a lot of businesses go out of business. The unknown is driving that, whereby what I'm seeing, and people that I've been actually talking to and companies that I'm engaged with, is that there is that sense of fear, and people are just trying to work harder without a sense of direction because of the unknown. That's a big challenge that I don't think we are thinking through or thinking about. Now, it's great to be in the space that we are in.
It is. The volume of effort is no longer the measuring stick. It's really the quality and the impact that people are doing. And that takes leadership to keep people focused on that and not focus on things they don't need to do, so that they can find time and balance and everything else that's going on in the world right now. I think there's an early decision point. Are you committed through your cultures and values to stay in a place like Hawaii? As you know, I'm very excited. It's my goal in life to move there myself. If that's it, then I think that drives a whole remote development path that is unique. And I think when you start doing that, you start thinking about, networking. And by networking, I mean actual, Cisco and advanced networking, software-defined networking. That can be done almost anywhere. And you can build up expertise and take classes online, and there's very good instructions. And the demand for that is far and beyond, and it's unrelenting. 5G is going to drive this to a whole new level. We're not even scraping the surface on the edge capabilities and that kind of stuff. Then there is am I trying to get into central infrastructure? This is going to be data centers. It's going to be large cloud computing, storage, concentration. That's still going to have a level, post-COVID, where you are going to need to be in an ecosystem where you can be part of driving that, part of managing that. The learnings from that, the environment is very, very important. One reason, once again, I got to know Phil so well is just New York is such a hub for interconnections and for data centers. And it has a certain level of gravity that you have to be a part of. And then that brings a whole level of jobs and capabilities. But I think that's really purely from an infrastructure standpoint. I think if you wanted the best of both worlds, I am loving the fact that I believe IoT, sort of the Internet of Things, is finally a actual thing. Whether it's sensors in a car, whether it's location sensors and weather sensors for grapes, whether it's somebody on Kauai probably working in the seed factories and trying to increase yield and predict yield. And that's going to create a whole nother field of people that want to get their hands dirty with the sensors and people that want to get their mind dirty with the data. And the data is by far going to be the largest transformation of jobs. It's people that interpret data, people that massage data, people that process data. It's going to literally, and I know it's a cliche, but it is going to become the new gold as IoT, data centers, and everything sort of combined. It's going to be, what do you do with this cacophony of data that's hitting you to drive business value? And almost anybody with any level of business acumen, whether they were in hospitality and they need to surf through the data of Marriott's reward program, or whether they're in a growing coffee and they need to surf through the data of the moisture and the yield. It's going to be those people that understand data that are going to derive value, and that's going to be a sustaining job and a future job that is going to pay well, and it's going to literally drive the next level of innovation in the whole world.
I think it's an incredible point, and to put a pin on it, I think that the majority of the outside world looking at our industry thinks that, to the extent that they even know that critical infrastructure exists, they all think it's, computers and kids in a basement. And they all think about it as, that's something that the geeks use. And, I'm not a computer person or a technology person, when in reality, the best innovations in our world have come from people from outside our industry, because you don't look at it as purely a technical issue. You look at it as, trying to solve a problem that specifically in your world, and leveraging technology to be able to solve it. Our generation, to a certain extent, certainly the generations before us, I'm not going to put myself in the same generation with you. Yes, you're younger than I am. I think the world needs to know that Luke Norris is younger slightly than me, although inside he's an old man because he's at 14 jobs already. I think that the older generation that is, kind of fearful of technology because they weren't there when it was, kind of as preeminent as it is today, will sort of convert to the current generation that cannot escape technology at all. My kids are on Zoom calls right this second in the same place where we're on a Zoom call, going to school or whatever. There's telehealth, telemedicine, all of those things everyone is a technologist because everyone has, essentially what was the old generation supercomputer in their pocket. So it's just, nobody is devolved from it. There is no vertical that isn't, can be, technologically, manipulated or levered. And I think, people need to stop thinking of themselves as either a technologist or not a technologist and start looking at technology as, an enablement platform for the next version of whatever world they're comfortable in. Although I'm struggling to find a way for a technologist to come out as someone that owns a small shave ice stand on the corner road in Kona.
I was just going to say that this is actually a good opportunity to enforce the fact that we are in a data rush, whereby people that are not in our space have an opportunity to potentially bring experiences, exposure, education to better other parts of the life. So whether it be traveling, for instance, or it be real estate. Phil, your experience with closing on your house, for instance, could be something that could be leveraged by those folks, or those experiences could be brought forward.
It's too painful.
So being a technologist and a futurist, Luke, being in the space, we see many science fiction movies presenting a dark future. COVID-19 has kind of sort of put us into that immediate hardship. Are you pessimistic or optimistic about the future? Do you see it to be a dark future or a bright future? And if so, what are some of the areas that you think are going to change our life?
So once again, I try to be an optimist, and I try to look at the problems of the future in ways we can solve them in bite-sized chunks, back to my sort of mantra. I fear that COVID has only accelerated the gap between the haves and the have-nots. And I don't mean that just from an economic standpoint, from the knowledge worker jobs, the service worker jobs, but to the big businesses versus the small businesses. It is going to be harder to get these things across the line. It's going to be harder to get innovation pushed through, and big businesses are going to have oversized effect in that. I also believe that we are going to reach a level in the next 5-10 years max where AI, ML, and computer-generated capabilities are going to impact our lives so greatly and positively that we're going to have to relook at the fundamentals of economy, and especially a service-based economy. When you could have, as you mentioned, Phil, a shaved ice, when you can have a shaved ice delivered via an app that's perfectly temperatured and controlled and right brought to your door, whether you're in Kona or Colorado, by a robot, that is going to displace certain levels of jobs. Uber jobs are obviously going to be displaced by autonomous driving. Healthcare jobs are going to be displaced by telehealth. But all those are fundamentally enhancements to the underlying quality of life, but that will dramatically change the underlining and the underpinning of many economies across the world, especially America's. And we are all fundamentally going to have to relook at that, whether it's some sort of universal healthcare system, a universal income system. Those are inevitabilities that we have to tackle. They're not easy. They are inevitabilities that we're going to have to tackle as we also tackle the mass change we're going to go through as a society with everything that machine learning, AI, ML, and robots are going to bring to market. And to be honest, that's one of the reasons I'm teaching my kids to code. It's one of the reasons I teach my kid, critical infrastructure, is I think that these are going to be those core jobs that drive the underlining value proposition and the new underpinning of the economies. And like I said, I've never been more proud and more excited for what the future entails and what our industry is going to provide that future.
Yeah, I'd like to take this opportunity and encourage people to start looking at it, not necessarily a career change, but start thinking like a technologist and a futurist and start educating themselves.
I think those are, look, it'd be difficult for me to find more appropriate words to end on. I know we need to wrap up, but, are there any, understanding that our audience is, these kind of next generation, people that are trying to understand, our world. Again, I think you put a pin in it brilliantly. But if you have any final thoughts, this is the time to let them out there and have that final knowledge drop. This is the last bite-sized bit of your elephant.
I guess I'd just like to sink some teeth into that. I have seen in the last year the world's largest genomic processor that is matching genome sequences to cancer drugs and to COVID take a month to process 30,000 genomes, so 30,000 people. And this is sort of before you release it to actual testing on individuals. And it would take a month with a very large amount of infrastructure in the cloud. Well, we've been able to prove out and help 2 organizations do what they did in a month. At the same cost, they can now do it within 5 days. Now, that is a dramatic change in the pace of innovation, the pace of delivery, and the impact overall in human health and society. Autonomous driving. I've seen every major manufacturer of vehicles dive into autonomous driving and just the label imaging. So to label what a stop sign is, to label what it is. You used to take, I kid you not, 50,000 people in other countries at low-end labor. And now the machines are so good that the machines are training machines, and now they don't need the 50,000 people at low labor. They can actually process themselves. And the training of those models went from a year to get to about 7% effective to a month to get to 75% effective, which is what you need to go into class 3 and class 4 sort of autonomous driving. I'm seeing literally cancer research institutes that are sharing their research off of common storage because it's the unique way in which they're processing it and their hypothesis. So there's so much innovation that is impacting society at its very roots, its very cores right now. And our ability to impact that, to make that innovation change, to actually feel like you're actually moving society forward has absolutely positively never been more prevalent than it is this very second. And I only see an exponential future for that.
This has been great. Nothing lasts forever. Markets will come back, currencies will rebound, businesses will go on, and we'll all move on. That could happen next week, next month, or next year. I'm confident that those who prepare rather than panic will come out of this stronger. Thank you for joining us. This has been brought to you by Nomad Futurist. Check us online at nomadfuturist.com.